Hi, I'm Kirsty Cullen, CEO at the Optimum Health Clinic, and I'm delighted to bring you one of our community stories today. And with that being said, I am delighted also to be joined by Louise, who worked with both our psychology and nutrition teams here at the Optimum Health Clinic on her own journey from fatigue-related illness back to health. Louise, welcome.
Hi.
So pleased to have you here, and it feels like a monumental moment in your own journey.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. From the beginning, I didn't imagine I'd ever get to this point. So yeah, it really is to be able to speak about feeling recovered is a monumental time.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you here. I'm aware that you approached the clinic in 2021 and you started work with us within the Reset program, the group sessions, and then sort of transitioned into one-to-one psychology sessions thereafter. And you also did some nutrition sessions with us as well. Can you start by describing what your state of health was at the time that you approached the clinic and really what the key symptoms were that you were experiencing?
Yeah, sure. I was pretty destitute actually when I rang the clinic. I had been ill my journey started in 2000 and it's sort of 18, 19. I very slowly started going downhill. I was a very keen runner, very keen on looking after my health and nutrition, always been active, 2 young children, self-employed. Everything was fine, and I just slowly started feeling not myself. Things weren't right, and I was getting just bizarre symptoms. Sort of in a nutshell, it started with something wrong with my eye, and then my leg, and then I just had no energy, and it just went on and on and on. And a very long story short, I eventually discovered, after all sorts of tests through the NHS telling me I was fine, and then going to a private clinic, and I discovered I had Lyme's disease. And I chose to find a private clinic because the NHS didn't seem equipped and did actually the tests they gave me suggested I didn't have it. So I went private because I knew my body and I knew there was something wrong with me, and we'd eliminated everything over a year. I'd had endless scans, and we discovered I had Lyme's disease. And I went through some very intensive treatment, which involved antibiotic infusions on a daily basis for a month, every day for 2 hours. And the long and short, and then I went on to a 6-month antibiotic oral treatment, which involved all sorts of supplements to support it. And I was taking 40 tablets a day, and it destroyed me, basically. I became iller and iller and iller. I do believe it was what I had to go through to rid my body of the Lyme's disease. So whether it was the right option now, I've done it now, but it destroyed my body, absolutely destroyed my body. I activated glandular fever within my system, the Epstein-Barr. I just had everything going on. I became very, very thin, and to the point where I was so ill during COVID that my husband had to carry me up the stairs. I couldn't eat because my body just didn't even have the energy to digest. After a few mouthfuls, I'd feel sick. My body just quit. I just had no energy. I couldn't do anything. I mean, to say I couldn't run, I could barely walk. I was incredibly thin and got into an incredibly dark place, a really dark place. In some ways it was good timing because the world had shut down anyway because of COVID, but in other ways I think that really went against me because I was so absorbed in what I was doing. There was just no distraction. I was locked in the house, ill. And I think that played a real part in my mental health really going downhill. And I went down a path of desperately looking for a silver bullet to fix me. Desperately looking for ways, and specialists, and the trouble is, I've now discovered, in the world of Lyme's disease, CFS, ME, fibromyalgia, there's lots of people out there that will promise you a silver bullet, and they are often very expensive silver bullets, and I was starting to realize that there just wasn't one. There just wasn't one. And I was in an incredibly dark place, and probably because I kept saying the word fatigue, my phone did show me an advert for the Optimum Health Clinic. But I saw the advert for the Optimum Health Clinic and watched a lot of Alex's videos. And I was on the cusp of actually going to a Lyme's disease clinic in central London, which probably wasn't much different to the clinic I went to, but started to realise there was a lot of evidence around medication wasn't the answer. The bacteria was in the system, and my system as a whole, my nervous system, was on the back foot, and I needed to help my nervous system to beat the Lyme's rather than just keep pounding it with all these antibiotics, which was not just killing the disease but destroying my system. And I rang the clinic, and they offered me the group session, which was much more cost effective than doing it on a one-to-one basis, and it seemed over a longer period as well, so it felt like it might be longer. I did kick back very much. I'm quite an independent sort of, the person prior to getting ill was the person that would, say, come on, pull yourself together, which I will never say to anybody ever. Having been where I've been, and I was slightly reluctant to do the group sessions, but I did. And if I'm honest, after the first session, I was still kicking back. My husband was very keen for me to do it. I think he could see that I needed help mentally, and I knew I did as well, but I didn't get it then. The understanding I've got now, I didn't have then. I knew what I was doing wasn't working, so this was an alternative, and I had to give it a shot because I had no life. I couldn't play with my children. Life was literally snatched from me. And so after the first session, I did get off the call and think, well, that was terrible. I just discussed being ill with other people who were ill, and we all just dwelled on being ill, and now I feel terrible. So but it turned from there. That was the beginning of where I am now, really.
Yeah. And just to dive into the psychology around illness a moment there, Louise, what was your relationship with your own body like at that point? Because obviously you mentioned there themes of not feeling comfortable with kind of that identity of being within a group of ill people, but also we've got this kind of secondary factor where there's an infectious invader in the body. So I'm just interested to know where your mindset was, whether it was more about I have an invader that I need to kind of attend to, or is it my body that is letting me down at this point, and where is my identity within being ill? Because those are all quite massive topics and a lot to kind of handle and manage.
Yeah, I mean, I hated my body. There were times when I hated my body, like disappointed with it in one, but because I had a reason, because it was the infection that caused where the state I got into. I guess I wasn't angry at my body as such, because it was just unlucky. I felt very defeated. I remember saying a lot of the time, when I got to 40 healthy, that was what I got out of life. And this is now what I've got. I'm lucky I got to 40 healthy, and I was utterly defeated. Couldn't see a way out of it. Had no confidence in my body. So, and I can talk about it in this way now, but I didn't have this knowledge at that time. But just no confidence in my body. So the fear of everything I did just destroying me. So I might wake up with, felt like 3% battery. I needed to know, what am I going to spend that 3% on today before I'm flat on my back? And I'd worry if I went over the 3%. And I got into a really vicious circle of not trusting my body to be able to do anything. Everything I did was preempted with panic, followed with panic. I spent the time doing it panicking about what the result was going to be, and I was in a vicious circle of just not feeling able to. I couldn't do anything just subconsciously. Just living life had gone. Everything came with expectation and panic and worry. And yeah, I just lost trust in my body, really. Just lost trust that it had the tools anymore. I just felt like it had been utterly destroyed, and it just didn't have the strength anlow. I didn't, I'll be honest, I felt like I would never get it back. It was gone. I was so low. I'd never felt like this in my life. And coming from somebody I've always been into nutrition. I've always exercised. It's always been a real passion and a real pleasure for me. And I guess because of that, I felt, well, I did all the right things prior to, and I still wasn't able to make my body strong enough to deal with that.
I think that lack of trust is such a common theme, certainly that we see clinically, the loss of trust in the body, and rebuilding that relationship kind of through the process is a massive part of it. So I can certainly hear that, within your case. If we think about what the road to improved health looked like, and what some of the key areas of focus were in your case, I know kind of working on the psychology subtypes was actually quite important for you. So we have a number of psychology subtypes that might kind of interplay with fatigue, and the helper, sort of being that rock in the family, is often one of those. And I wonder if you could sort of describe the helper's role in your own journey.
Yeah, we all fall into a certain category. We all have a part to play in our families, our smaller family and our wider family, don't we? And I think I'd always been the helper. I'd always been the rock for various people in my family. Obviously for my children, but as a parent, you sort of take that role on. I've got young children. That's expected to take that on for your children, but for various other people in my family, I did. When I was first ill, they very much did all step away from that relationship, because I was so ill. There was no option for people to step away from that relationship and treat me differently. I think where it was much harder is when you start to show some sort of recovery. You can feel it sort of slip back to what was before quite quickly, and through no fault of their own. I don't love anybody any less for it, but I'd become very aware of the role I had in my family, and the burden that was to me and my system, and had been for a very long time. And once I had that awareness, it's then really hard to move into recovery without people just slotting back into those roles and having those expectations of you, when you've become aware that they're through my therapy and through the clinic. A boatload was a big thing we spoke about, and me becoming aware that they can't always be part of my boatload, because I have to manage it with what's in my own life. So that was quite a hard part of the recovery for me. It was a really hard part, sort of, and still something I manage now, and I believe I'll have to manage for the rest of my life. And I think what's quite nice about my recovery as well, probably jumping forward a bit here, but is there ever a finish line? Life's a moving target generally, and we're all getting older, and life changes, and my children are getting older, my parents are getting older, all these things are changing. I don't even see that there's a finish line anymore. It's just me managing my life for my body so that it doesn't become too much.
So identifying that kind of psychological subtype was helpful. What were some of the tools and realizations along the way on the sort of psychology work side of things that you found to be helpful?
I think initially the stops. the simple stops that they taught us to do in the group sessions. I found them the first time it makes me a bit emotional now thinking back, but the first time I did a stop, I sobbed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's quite all right.
The first time I ever did one.
And what was it, Louise, in that moment that felt so emotional, but possibly empowering about that stop? So just to explain a stop, it's a way of literally, as the name suggests, stopping those kind of cyclical, unhelpful thought patterns, which kind of perpetuate this state of maladaptive stress and unhelpful thought patterns, as it were. So recognizing that tool and utilizing it, was it a sense of being able to kind of have control in that moment that made you feel emotional, or was it something else?
I think it was almost my body saying, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh my God, she's listening.
Yeah.
It was, and I found them, I guess it was that inner part of me, the inner child, whatever it may be. And yeah, it was a really emotional time for me, and I didn't know I had all that emotion. I am a bit of I'm not your emotional type, and again, I now see that all of this feeds everything, and I still struggle now with emotion. It's me, it's the way I am, it's the way I've been brought up, but I have such an awareness now. I have such an awareness, and even if I just give it 10 seconds of just acknowledging, oh, I feel it's sad about that. Whereas I think I was so angry and so caught up in where I wasn't listening to my body. I was just searching for an answer, just constantly searching for an answer, rather than just stepping back and saying, you know what, it's okay to be sad about this. You don't just have to keep fighting to get better. You could just stop for a minute and go, oh, poor you.
Yeah. And I think as a rock, there's a tendency to push through, to kind
Absolutely.
of push your feelings and emotions to one side to attend to everybody else's. And so our body naturally becomes more and more neglected. And it's an interesting discussion I often have with clients, in that they can feel very let down and frustrated by their body's own incapacity in the moment. But actually what we want to do is flip that messaging around, in that your body is trying to tell you, it's trying to inform you by literally putting you on your backside often, that we need to stop. I'm kind of putting a red flag in the air. So flipping that lack of capacity and lack of ability into, this is my body's way of communicating with me. And I think once that relationship with your body is established, it becomes much easier to feel more self-compassion, to listen to those signals, to rest, to do the stops, to pace more effectively, because you're actually prioritizing your body's needs first and foremost, and putting those there at the forefront of your mind, instead of what else it is that you need to do for everybody else. Did that feel representative of your situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went, from the day I started my treatment for Lyme's disease, I went into it telling everybody, I've got this, I'm going to beat this, and everybody's like, oh, we know you, Louise, you'll be fine. So I went into it with no compassion for myself, actually. I just went into it with my achiever part of my personality, which with a combination of my achiever and my carer of what tripped me up a lot of the time. And I just went into it with, I'm going to beat it. And every day that I felt tired, I wouldn't allow myself, no, you can't, you've got to keep going, you're not going to let this get you. And I look back now, and maybe if I had just let it get me for 6 months and let the treatment do its job without fighting through it, and I had so much anger. I mean, anger has been something I've had to work on a lot. I think anger is my go-to emotion. If I feel sad or worried or scared, I won't show those vulnerabilities. They'll come out in anger and rattiness and short temper, and I've now learned that, you know, when your nervous system is that way, that your fuse is so short. I mean, my fuse was non-existent, and with 2 young children, and then I beat myself up for being snappy with the children, and obviously during COVID I was having to homeschool, and it was also very, very difficult. But once I started to sort of honor some of those emotions and not see them as a weakness,
Absolutely.
that's really when things started to turn around.
Yeah. And there is that window of tolerance, isn't there? When you're at the very edge of your capacity, of course, your window of tolerance is much smaller. So your reactivity to situations is going to be different, because as you say, you're working out how to spend your 3% energy capacity, and that brings its own pressures. You mentioned the achiever there, which of course is another psychology subtype here. I'm interested to know how that interplayed with this kind of need to pace and be mindful about energy spend, and even sort of through that period of improvement as we kind of stretch and bounce the boundaries around pacing. What did that journey look like for you, and how easy was it for you to kind of avoid those achiever tendencies and push through?
Yeah, so that was a tough one for me, and tripped me up a few times, for sure. But then I look back now and I don't see that as a bad thing, because they still helped me to learn.
Yeah.
And Nick, my therapist, played a huge part in helping me with my achiever, and just setting those boundaries on what is achievable. I think early days it wasn't such an issue because you're so cautious.
Yeah.
It's when you start to feel a little bit more confident, but then it can work the other way as well, because then you start thinking, oh no, maybe I shouldn't do it. It's so I felt my job was to calm my nervous system. Every minute of every day I was trying to just calm my nervous system, use all the techniques that I've been taught by the clinic. But then there's coming out the other side of that can actually be a negative thing, because you're doing them all the time. It's actually letting go of them. And yes, so my achiever is actually, I should be doing more of those, because they're the things that help me. And then actually you end up doing too much of it because you're so focused on it. So it was finding the balance. And I think that's why there were crashes along the way. I wouldn't say a crash, and then it's learning what is a crash and what is natural tiredness, and I'm forever learning. I'm still forever learning.
Of course, yeah, of course. And I think there was a moment, wasn't there, in your journey, where as we push the boundaries a little bit more, some of those crashes are inevitable for us to kind of learn where the edges are. But I think that there was a really significant turning point for you in one of those crashes, where there was kind of a recognition around having this toolkit. I wonder if you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so I had the worst crash I'd ever had, actually. Only, so where are we? March, April, May, June, July. So it was only less than a year and a half ago. We went on holiday abroad, which would it help? So there was lots of thought. Would it help going abroad, getting away, changing environment? The environment's been a big thing for me as well. I think COVID played a part in that, because I was stuck in the same environment for my entire illness and recovery. And I still have slight issues with environment. I can feel when I go away, things improve even greater. Yeah, so we attempted to go abroad, and it was an utter disaster. I had the most almighty crash, but I think the preemption that went into the holiday, the fear going into that holiday, it was just a recipe for disaster. And we're not robots. I have had medical issues along the way also, in that I was anemic. That was to do with my cycle, my menstrual cycle. and that's what I mean, where's the finish line? Because your body's always changing, so we're always managing all these things. And it was a recipe for disaster. I had the worst crash imaginable. We got home from the holiday, my parents had to collect the children, I literally couldn't move, I couldn't eat. I felt like I'd gone back to square one. But this time I went back to square one with lots of knowledge and tools. I was petrified, because you just don't know with this condition how long this is going to last. But really, that was my turning point, that crash, that huge crash, which I thought, this is going to be years to get out of this. But I used the tools, and I had a lot of sessions with Nick. My one-to-one therapy, he literally saved my life. Literally saved my life. I think going into that huge crash, just with a toolkit this time, I wasn't learning the toolkit, I had the toolkit, and I knew how to put them into place. And it feels very much at the time that are these things really helping? But then from that point, I would say I probably came out of that crash. Obviously, I was very fragile, but 6 weeks maybe before I was functioning, which, sympathy for anybody out there that's functioning, that's not a way to live your life, just being able to function. It's exhausting if you can just function. But I got back to that point. It's been slow. There's been smaller crashes along the way. But I did run 12k this morning.
Well, goodness. We take it from this point to this point. It's, and that's an indication of how far this journey has come. But what I love about your story, Louise, is there is a reality to it. We're not suggesting there is a silver bullet. We never would. We're not suggesting that the journey is completely linear, because there's always permutations within that. But I think what's really important about your story is this growing understanding of yourself, your own kind of patterns within that, and then your growing understanding and confidence around the use of the tools and your own empathy for your own body and your own importance and prioritization. And those themes appear to me to have been really crucial kind of through your journey. I wonder if we could turn attention to food, because I think, you mentioned that you had been so interested in nutrition and there'd been such effort going into food. When you approached the clinic and started nutrition work, there was quite a difficult relation with food because of that. And I wonder if you could kind of talk us through that journey a little.
Yeah, I don't think nutrition directly has been my issue. As you say, I think it's been my emotional relationship that developed with food. Yeah. And the fear of, because it's very difficult as well, because people are very quick to say, well, take this out of your diet, take that out, take gluten out of your diet, take everything out of your diet. And then you think, oh my God, I ate that. And then the panic sets in about what you ate. And I obviously, the treatment that I had, my gut, I'm sure, was stripped. My microbiome, my diversity, I'm sure was absolutely stripped. I did have do some microbiome testing and things. So for me, it wasn't so much about what I was eating; it was how I was thinking about eating. And I did a small amount of support with the clinic on nutrition, which was very helpful. But actually, it was more the therapy side of, because I always used to feel terrible after I had my dinner. Yeah. Every day, I'd have my dinner, and then I'd be thinking, oh, hopefully I can go to bed soon. Hopefully it's the children could get and it was, and actually, and I found with a lot of things. So the work I did with Nick, we did a lot of tapping around how I felt after dinner, and things as simple as, sorry, is that loud? Can you hear that noise?
Not at all. No.
Things as simple as changing where I was sitting at the dinner table. So as a family, you just automatically all sit in the same places all the time. So just sitting the other side of the table, which my children thought was extremely strange. Why on earth are you sitting the other side of the table? So I told them I just wanted to mix it up. I was a bit bored of sitting that side. And sometimes it was as simple as just talking and airing how I was feeling about a certain, and then without realizing it, a few days later, I think, oh my goodness, it hasn't happened. So often it was, but often when I spoke about something, there would be some emotion that came with it. So I would tell Nick about how it made me feel, and then I would sob about how it made me feel after dinner. And I think that's what I've really learned. I hold so much emotion in, and if I can let parts of it out and really listen to my body, yoga nidra meditation, I will always be part of my kit box now, always. And just listening to my body and where I might feel some emotion that's got caught, or it's a part of me that I'm not listening to. The yoga nidra and things like that, just I mean, there'll be something I will always use, because life is always going to make, I've learned, and I'm the kind of person, my boat is always going to be brimming, and I've just got to be aware that there are times when you have to try and offload some things, and that's when, knowing now that I'm a helper, and actually sometimes you can't make the boat any lighter. Just knowing the boat is full can sometimes help. Just knowing, just having some sympathy for yourself, to think, you know what, you've got that going on, you've got that going on, no wonder you feel a bit under the weather for that. Because I just ploughed through life thinking the more you can do, the better you're doing, but it doesn't work like that.
I'd love to talk a little bit about family scaffolding within the context of our conversation, because obviously, as the person who is going through an illness, you're very kind of consciously aware of the impact on you, also the impact on family, but also there is an impact on family, and quite often our family members can require a little bit of support. And I know that this was the case here. I wonder if you'd mind sharing something around that for us.
No, I'm more than happy to. So I mean, the burden on my husband was absolutely huge. As I say, it was during COVID. At times I couldn't get up the stairs, 2 young children, bills to be paid, and I went from being an extremely positive, driven person to somebody that at times didn't see the point in living, and that's a huge drain on somebody. And there were tough times for our relationship, really tough times for our relationship. Again, my anger that I was aware of, but it didn't mean I could always control it. It wasn't anger at my husband, it was anger at life, but he was there to hear it and witness it and see the low place I'd got to. So my husband did reach out also to the clinic. There's some useful stuff you've got on the system, with the portal that I have access to, that actually for family. So he did view some of those videos, and we got to the point where he did reach out, and he did have a couple of sessions, and actually it was really useful, because I saw a few therapists before I got to the Optimum Health Clinic, and unfortunately I just don't think they understood my situation. It wasn't right for what I was trying to recover from, and I think for my husband it was just such a huge benefit to be able to speak to somebody that knew what he'd been through, like really knew what he'd been through. And my therapist, particularly, as you know, he's been through it with his wife, so I mean, he got so much from that, from speaking to somebody that has been there and seen their wife not even be the person they married for a period of time, and the scars that leaves as well, because it's not just what you went through. And actually, when we were going through it, you manage, because you have to. it's when I started to come out the other side, actually, my husband started to really feel the effects, and he had a real dip. And is still having, because I think any issues you've got in your own life just get shelved. You just have to cope. So his life sort of got shelved for a bit. So we're still working through stuff now, but I believe we're stronger for it. And for both of us, the knowledge we've got of life, and mental health, and all those things, you know, you can't, you know, it's a bit cliche, and you know, you see these. When I first joined the clinic, you see people that say, you know, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I wouldn't not want to have the knowledge I've got now. So I wouldn't want to go through it again. I'm not saying I wouldn't change anything necessarily, but I'm really grateful for the knowledge I have now, and that my husband and I have the ability to reach out for help and aren't just ploughing through life blind, which would probably have consequences at some point anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk there about coming through the other side. So I'm really interested to know, what does it look like on the other side? And how do you feel about being on the other side? How comfortable are you with your body now? What's your relationship with your body? And what's your relationship with being well?
It's I'd say it's good now, but that's been a really hard part for me. So running's been my passion, and I thought going for a run was going to be the finish line. I thought, do you know what, the day I can go for a run, I'm going to announce it to everybody, everybody's going to rejoice, and it's going to be, and I'm going to say, you know, you can beat anything, it's going to be fabulous. Well, that was my dream, you know, if it could ever happen. But I began running in secret because I was so nervous. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, that I didn't trust that this would last. I was incredibly fearful that the minute people knew I had that sort of strength, that they thought it meant I was fixed, and that they would automatically fall into all of those roles of me being their rock, which I'd been trying to manage. I don't think you can never switch that off. It's the relationship we have. But I can be aware of it, and I'm so aware of it now. And I can manage how much of it I absorb and I take on. So the actual, and I think that's where Nick really came into his own, because I felt like I was walking a tightrope and just people were ready to push me off. And so I would tell people I'd been for a walk when actually I'd run. I told my husband I'd been for a walk. He knew I'd been for a run, but he'd come back and said, "You'd have a nice walk," and I'd say yes. But I went early in the morning, and when I took the school run, I wasn't brave enough to wear running clothes. It was a quite good opportunity to go for a run after the school run, but I wasn't brave enough to wear my running clothes on the school run, because I was just so nervous of people thinking that means I'm fixed. That means that, you know, it's sort of job done. And I was also scared that I would jinx it. And it would go wrong. So yeah, that was a really tough part, and there were dips in it as well, because I was pushing my boundaries, and I still have to work with now at times. Accepting tiredness as tiredness will probably be something I've always got to work on a little bit. I believe there'll be parts I've always got to work on, but I'm not scared of them.
No, it's kind of a renormalization of some of those symptoms as they were, but kind of, you know, normal impacts of everyday, you know, function. So fatigue in a normal way, leg pain, which I know was a big symptom for you sort of at the beginning.
Huge. And I still have leg pain.
Yeah.
But it was almost like my leg pain was attached to my brain and could actually make me mad. It was such a trigger for me, the leg pain, because I saw it as a disease in me. I could never accept that I might just have some leg pain, because I might have well, I think I do have an IT band issue. I've run most of my life, so I'm bound to have some issues, but I could only ever see them as worst case scenario. And I can also now, I can really, really notice, you know, if my boat is really full, I'm emotionally having, you know, there's a lot of burden on me emotionally with things going on with family or anything like that, my pains will get worse. And I can accept that now and see that as a bit of a symptom that I get. It does flag up a bit, but I don't have that. I've cut that tie, that emotional link to panic. I'm Louise, I feel well, and I have leg pain, not I am leg pain. I just felt like I was just a leg pain for such a long time. But there's funny things that happen. So the other day when I was running, I fell over and I went flying.
Oh goodness.
But you know, actually it was quite liberating to fall over and get up and be okay. And I laughed about it. I had some scratches on my hands. I was okay. But it almost felt quite liberating to think, you know what, I couldn't have fallen over 3 years ago. It would have destroyed me. But I've been for a run, I've fallen over, I've got some scratches, I'm okay. And it's that was almost a milestone in recovery. I've been for a run and fallen over, and I had a real recent one. So we go to Cornwall quite a lot, and some of the trips to Cornwall have been very, very difficult. And my children over the last sort of 3 to 4 years have started surfing lessons whenever we're in Cornwall, and I always saw myself as the mum that would be there doing it with them, and I've had to stand and watch, and it's broken my heart to watch them and their dad surf. But in 3 weeks ago I went to Cornwall and I surfed with my children, and you know, so it's
wonderful.
All the things that I thought meant recovery. And it wasn't like I massively exerted myself, the waves were tiny, but the joy of surfing with my children was, so that's recovery.
Yes.
Getting back into life and doing the things you love, not about always being able to push yourself to the maximum, and your body always be able to cope with everything. Actually, recovery for me is knowing the days that maybe this week I have some weeks when I can't run, but I'm a woman of mid-40s and I have cycles, and I'm starting to understand that actually there's other things that play a part. And I just need to be kind to myself, and if I really think I can't, then it doesn't mean I'm ill. It means I'm a human being and not a robot.
Exactly that. In that position now, Louise, what advice would you offer to somebody who's maybe at the start of their journey, with everything that you've learned and all the sort of permutations along the way? What is the key advice you would offer?
Because I you know, people in life that might not be as destitute as I was, but have health issues and have things. I think people need to be open to learn to not be ill. And it sounds patronizing. I wouldn't want that to sound patronizing to anybody, because I only knew how to be ill. It was safer to be ill in the end. It was safer to show people that I couldn't run. It was easier to say, no, I can't do that. It was easier to say, it was just easier to do what I knew. I think if people can just try and open their minds to the possibility that you could learn to not be ill, but it won't be quick, and there'll be lots of hiccups along the way, and actually they're the bits that mean you stay well, because if there weren't any hiccups you would take it for granted. So I think that was when I look at people in a similar situation or with a condition, so many people want to rely on medication, and medication played a part in what I needed, but there was no medication that was going to help me recover. There just wasn't. There just wasn't. And actually just me being kind to myself and calming my system and allowing emotions to come up and work through it slowly. And so I think, yeah, I just would like people to think that their minds have learnt to be ill, and it's really hard to see beyond that. But there is a way. There is a way. And I believe with so many conditions now, and that's been hard for me as well. That's been really hard for me, because my helper wants to go and share this with everybody.
Yes.
And is angry that anybody that won't listen to me.
Yeah.
And I feel frustrations towards people that are close to me, that I can see that they're not helping themselves. So actually having to accept that as well, and step back and think, I can't help everyone.
Yeah.
So that's been, you know, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops and share it with everybody. But then you learn that that's not helping me either. So you just learn like I say, there's no finish line. There's just no finish line. And that takes the pressure away as well, I think.
It does. It's consistent, mindful adaptation and acceptance. And I think those are really poignant and important messages. So thank you so much for sharing them, because they will be infinitely helpful for people who are at the beginning of the journey and trying to think about what comes next. But obviously, as you say, everyone needs to be at the point of readiness. You know, they need to sort of be ready to kind of embark on that journey. But obviously yours is one of real honesty and gives a real, you know, honest vision into what that process is like, challenges and all, and how it continues thereafter, and how the relationship with the body can adapt and change over a period of time as well, and how your sense of who you are at the end of that journey also adapts and changes, because so often we see who comes into the journey as a very different person to the one that leaves the journey. So I wonder, for you, what is your relationship now with your body?
Yeah, I think, and that's almost the fear as well, because you're trying to go back to who you were. That is the whole point of recovery. For me, it was, I just want to be who I was before. I just want to go back to the Louise I knew. So the acceptance that Louise is gone, because not completely, but there has had to be some change. So I'm kinder to my body. I am kinder. Just so much more aware. Just so much more aware of what I ask of my body sometimes. Exercise-wise, I will always have to be careful how much I push exercise-wise. It's just part of me. But as I say, I do have weeks where I can't run, and I accept this is one of those weeks. I'll say to my husband, he'll say you haven't run, and I'll say it's just one of those weeks. I can't do it.
And that's okay. Yeah.
And that's okay. Yeah, because I now know I will be able to run. Yeah. It might be a week's time, might be 10 days time, but I will be able to run. And I think that is one of the key messages, actually, that Nick, my therapist, taught me as well. And I have said this to myself thousands of times. You won't always feel like this. So when I feel it coming over me, and really anybody that's suffered to this level with fatigue and things, you can feel it's like a wave sometimes. It comes. But I can say to myself, even when I'm having a really bad day, which a really bad day now isn't a really bad day in comparison to what I used to have, but when I can feel it coming over me a bit, I am able to say stop, feel my feet on the floor, and say, you won't feel like this forever. It might be, and in fact, sometimes I can say to myself, do you know what, it might even be 2 hours time that you feel better. Or it might be, but that and the stops have been really huge for me. Such small things, but it stopped my brain going down the other path, which is so unhelpful, of just building on what terrible things might happen. So just stop at that point and say, you're not going to feel like this forever. It's been a really useful tool.
Fantastic. Louise, thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and your emotions, which is obviously extremely key, sort of given the journey that you've been on. As I say, I know they'll be incredibly valuable to the fatigue community out there that watch. So thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all.
And obviously, if anyone watching wants to know more about the clinic and what we do, then you can pop onto the website there and have a look, which is www.theoptimumhealthclinic.com. Louise, thanks again.
Thank you.